You're listening to PodCatalyst, the official podcast of IABC, where communicators from around the world tell their stories. Let's get started with today's episode. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Today's guest is Candace Denison, who talks to us about misinformation and the role of the communicator. She starts off by sharing a little bit of good news in what is an otherwise challenging, complex landscape. We also get into the concept of the roots of false belief, and she takes a minute to break down the difference between misinformation and disinformation, which I found to be really interesting. Candace was a presenter at our 2024 World Conference in Chicago, so whether or not you were able to join us, I think this episode is a great primer for how to think about and approach misinformation as a communications professional in today's world. Thanks again to Candace for joining us on this episode, as well as sharing her expertise at the conference. So with that, let's get started with the show.
Hi, my name is Candace Denison. I lead all communications and engagement efforts in my local government, and I think that communication creates a bridge for understanding in a world crowded with misinformation.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Frankevich. I'll be your host for today. We've got another installment of In Under 10, where we talk comms, news, and trends in 10 minutes or less. Candace, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you.
So you'll be presenting at the IABC World Conference this June in Chicago, and your session is focused on countering misinformation in the digital age. I know misinformation has certainly been a hot topic the last few years, not really anything new for the communication professional, but certainly something we're all keeping an eye on. So what is new and concerning in the space that really led you to develop this presentation?
So what's concerning is the sophistication of misinformation tactics. It is really evolving, and with AI, the reach, the frequency, and the impact of misinformation is just continuing to escalate. And I think that communication professionals are going to struggle to keep pace with just this rapid change. But there is actually some good news, and that is that there is a ton of research that's being published to help us understand and develop some strategies. So that's why I've developed this session to equip my peers with the tools to identify and combat misinformation effectively. We are valued as strategic advisors to our senior leadership teams, and misinformation isn't something that I learned in school, and I'm really not comfortable acting on gut. I prefer to have science and research to support my recommendations, and that exists now. So I'm just happy to share that with my friends.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you're leading with good news here, right? Because we see misinformation, and I think our gut clenches a little bit. We're like, how are we going to fight this? We're in the wild west of AI era right now. So I love your perspective that, there's research developing around this, and we can come to this issue armed with the facts, which is exactly what we need. So I know you're going to touch a little bit on in your session the roots of false belief. That's really kind of interesting to me. What is that, and why is it something communicators need to understand?
So the roots of false belief are the why. They are why someone chooses to believe misinformation. And there's really two categories that these fall under. There's social. So, for example, an emotional response or partisanship views. And there's cognitive. So that would be lack of analytical thinking or familiarity effects. And understanding why someone believes something actually changes how we counteract it. So to give an example, if we wanted to say that some misinformation that was circulating was untrue, and this was due to like a familiarity effect. So this is just something that's been circulating in the community, and a lot of people have heard this rumor and they're starting to think it's true. We actually would correct that. So we would say something like, initial suspicions were wrong. There was no evidence of arson surrounding that wildfire. There was signs of dry lightning strikes, and this was collaborated by the environmental agency showing lightning occurred. And you'd want to provide as many details as possible and just challenge that misinformation directly. But if it's a social reason, so example, a worldview, you actually want to reaffirm their belief. So a good example on that would be, say it was climate change. You would say something like, the economic impacts are important and climate change mitigation efforts are costly. But there may also be economic impacts for not addressing climate change. So you want to kind of softly go at it instead. So depending on why someone believes something, you're wanting to implement a different strategy and a different how.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really underscores the role a communicator plays then, right? It really takes a skilled professional to use those active listening skills, take a step back, pause. I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
So, what are some misconceptions about countering misinformation that folks should be wary of? I mean, what's out there that we need to maybe fact check our biases or fact check ourselves on?
One of one of the biggest mistakes that I see around misinformation is the difference between misinformation and disinformation. A lot of people use these terms, as synonyms. They misinformation, disinformation are the same thing. And that's not actually the case. They can't be used interchangeably. So misinformation is spreading false or untrue statements without the intent to cause harm. And disinformation is spreading them with intent to cause harm. And what I see, or what I should say, is that when it's misinformation, so when there is no intent, yes, of course, they're both causing harm, but if there's no intent, that's when you want to use communication strategies and tactics. That's when you will go and you will talk to people and you will say, here is how we're going to correct this false belief, and here's how we're going to get people to understand what's happening. But if it's disinformation, this is when it is no longer a communications problem. This is lawyers, cease and desist. This is law enforcement and authorities. And that's where I think a lot of people making a mistake is not correctly understanding intent. So you don't communicate when somebody is trying to cause you harm, and you don't send a cease and desist letter to an elderly woman down the street. You have to be very mindful of the intent. So I would love to help people to understand the difference between those two, and when communications is applied and when you actually tag in your legal team and go that route instead.
That's really interesting. Just understanding the fine line between the two and where we can use our expertise as communicators and where it becomes a situation where it's really no longer in our jurisdiction, right? For lack of a better. Yeah. So where do you see this landscape evolving? I mean, we talked a little bit at the start about AI and the rapid advancement of misinformation, but where do you see things going?
I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, we're likely going to see an arms race between misinformation tactics and countermeasures. So as communicators, we're going to need to stay ahead by just continuously updating our strategies and embracing technology, fostering media literacy. And we're also going to need to really focus on building trust, because we all know that that's such a crucial element in effective communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Candace, thank you for your time today. It was really interesting getting to hear a little bit about your session coming up this June in Chicago. And, I feel like I learned something new today too. Misinformation versus disinformation. Those are two very different things that we need to keep abreast of.
That's right. And thanks for having me here today. And I'm looking forward to attending Chicago in June as well.
Thanks for listening to PodCatalyst, the official podcast of IABC. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Have a suggestion for a future episode? Send us a note at catalyst@iabc.com. To discover all IABC has to offer, visit our website at iabc.com. Until next time.